Hazel wasn't sure what he meant, but Percy did remind her of Jason, even though they looked nothing alike. They had the same aura of quiet power, plus a kind of sadness like they'd seen their destiny and knew it was only a matter of time before they met a monster they couldn't beat. Hazel understood that feeling. She watched the sun set in the ocean, and she knew she had less than a week to live. Whether or not their quest succeeded, their journey would be over by the Feast of Fortuna. She thought about her first death, the months leading up to it, her house in Seward, the 6 months that she'd spent in Alaska, taking the little boat into Resurrection Bay at night, visiting the cursed island. She realized her mistake too late. Her vision went black, and she slipped back in time. The rental house was a clapboard box suspended on pilings over the bay. When the train from Anchorage rolled by, the furniture shook and the pictures rattled on the walls. At night, Hazel fell asleep to the sound of icy water lapping against the rocks under the floorboards. The wind made the buildings creak and groan. They had one room with a hot plate and an icebox for a kitchen. One corner was curtained off for Hazel, where she kept her mattress and a storage chest. She'd pinned her drawings and old photos of New Orleans on the walls, but that only made her homesick worse. Her mother was rarely home. She didn't go by Queen Marie anymore. She was just Marie, the hired help. She'd cook and clean all day at the diner on 3rd Avenue for fishermen, railroad workers, and the occasional crew of Navy men. She'd come home smelling like pine salt and fried fish. At night, Marie Levesque would transform. The voice took over, giving Hazel orders, putting her to work on their horrible project. Winter was the worst. The voice stayed longer because of the constant darkness. The cold was so intense, Hazel thought that she'd never be warm again. When summer came, Hazel couldn't get enough of the sun. Every day of summer vacation, she stayed away from home as long as she could, but she couldn't walk around town. It was a small community. The other kids spread rumors about her, the witch's child who lived in the old shack by the docks. If she came too close, the kids jeered at her or threw bottles and rocks. The adults weren't much better. Hazel could have made their lives miserable. She could have given them diamonds, pearls, or gold. Up here in Alaska, gold was easy. There was so much in the hills, Hazel could have buried down the town without even half trying. But she didn't really hate the locals for pushing her away. She couldn't blame them. She spent the day walking the hills. She attracted ravens. They'd call at her from the trees and wait for the shiny things that appeared in her footsteps. The curse never seemed to bother them. She saw brown bears, too, but they kept their distance. When Hazel got thirsty, she'd find a snowmelt waterfall and drink cold, clean water until her throat hurt. She'd climb as high as she could and let the sunshine warm her face. It wasn't a bad way to pass time, but she knew eventually she'd have to go home. Sometimes she thought about her father, that strange, pale man in the silver and black suit. Hazel wished he'd come back and protect her from her mother, maybe use his powers to get rid of that awful voice. If he was a god, he should be able to do that. She looked up at the ravens and imagined they were his emissaries. Their dark eyes were maniacal like his. She wondered if they reported her movements to her father. But Pluto had warned her about Alaska. He also warned her mother and told her that it was a land beyond the gods. He couldn't protect them there. If he was watching Hazel, he didn't speak to her. She often wondered if she had imagined him. Her old life seemed as distant as the radio programs that she'd listened to, or President Roosevelt talking about the war. Occasionally, the locals would discuss the Japanese and some fighting on the islands of Alaska, but even that seemed far away, not nearly as scary as Hazel's problem. One day in midsummer, she stayed out later than usual, chasing a horse. She'd seen it first when she'd heard a crunching sound behind her. She saw a gorgeous tan roan stallion with a black mane, just like the one she'd ridden her last day in New Orleans, when Sammy had taken her to the stables. It could have been the same horse, though it was impossible. It was eating something off the path, and for a second, Hazel had the crazy impression it was munching one of the gold nuggets that always appeared in her wake. "Hey, fella," she called. The horse looked at her warily. Hazel figured it must belong to someone. It was too well groomed, its coat too sleek for a wild horse. If she could get close enough... What? She could find his owner? Return it? No, she thought. I just want to ride it again. She got within 10 feet and the horse bolted. She spent the rest of the afternoon trying to catch it, getting maddeningly close before it ran away again. She lost track of time, which was easy to do in the summertime with the sun staying up so long. Finally, she stopped at a creek for a drink and looked at the sky, thinking it must be around 3 in the afternoon. Then she heard a train whistle from down in the valley. She realized it had to be evening run to Anchorage, which meant it was 10 o'clock at night,